everyone, it's Tony Flath, and I'm here today with Talk with T-Man. And I'm lucky to have Val Bercovici with me. And Val Bercovici he's the founder actually of PencilDATA. And actually, Val and I just had a recent podcast we did with IBM Cloud, which was a lot of fun. Hey Val, how you doing today?
Doing great, Tony. Great to chat.
Nice. Well, it certainly is great to chat. So, wanted to have a better conversation with you and go through kind of some of your background and the story of Val. How did Val come to be, and a little more about PencilDATA, and then we'll get into some more discussions about a topic you gave me that's certainly given me some food for thought. So I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Tony. So oddly enough, I think one of the interesting catalysts for my career was a basketball league. It was a simple pickup basketball league. I was wrapping up university, as we call it in Canada, not college, and wrapping up a co-op degree, which, as you know, is just a wonderful way to get a technical education, a technical degree up in Canada. And I was wondering whether I should pursue like a master's or PhD in math. I had a professor that really wanted to, I guess, be my professor and do some grad work. And yeah, intellectually it was interesting. But at this basketball league, this consultant, I was in Ottawa at the time, this consultant said, hey, I can get you doing contract work for the federal government for $300 a day.
Nice.
And that was a fortune for like a student basically back then. So I said, sign me up, forget about this PhD or master's. And that was kind of all she wrote. I started working, professionally in contracting. I'd always thought my career would be, work at a job like Nortel, especially if you're up in Ottawa, learn the business, learn a biz, so to speak, and then eventually develop enough experience and credibility that you can break out on your own. And my career's, progressed exactly opposite of that, 180-degree difference. So that's like career advice to all young adults out there looking about, over-planning their career. Don't over-plan it. Just let it happen and do what you're good at. So in my case, I started contracting for various government departments. You remember the GST, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's so cool that you started in Canada. This is great. Yeah. Keep on going.
I must be like one of the 10 people in the country that doesn't hate the GST because it pretty much paid for my first house. I did a lot of work with what used to be the Canada Customs and Revenue Agency back then, implementing the GST.
Wow.
And at the same time, this is dating myself, but there was a time when enterprises did not use Microsoft. There was a whole bunch of other technologies, mainframe and mini, and Unix being used. And I was one of the guys that helped the Microsoft office in Ottawa kind of really popularize their technologies, not just Office, but all the back end stuff, what they used to call back office, SQL Server and Exchange and, SharePoint ultimately. So I was working on stuff like that, doing a lot of programming, doing C programming, C++, doing a lot of what I think is called Transact SQL, the language of SQL Server, and jumping from department to department. So very, very data centric. And a funny thing happened, which was AT&T, Ma Bell down here in the U.S., was in the process of buying NCR. This is sometime in the mid-90s now. So about, 5-10 years into my career. And as that hostile takeover, as I found out later on, was going on, NCR, kind of Russian babushka doll style, was out purchasing small companies with Microsoft expertise. And sure enough, the company I was working for, the systems integrator I was working for that specialized in Microsoft technology, was acquired. And so I ended up basically learning about this really cool product called Teradata. So I'd had some, Oracle and Sybase and even Formix experience, and all of a sudden I get exposed to data warehouses. And I realized I like databases. I like database technology. Ended up specializing in that and running a team of professional services, about 15 data warehouse administrators for various government departments. And right around then, a recruiter from Silicon Valley finally found me. And Silicon Valley is this mystical place when you're up in Canada and Ottawa in the cold tundra of the winter.
It for sure is. Yeah.
And the mosquito construction season in the summer. So I was very curious. And sure enough, I realized that after spending, a couple of visits down here in the Bay Area, that I liked creating some of the technologies I worked on more than implementing them for customers. So thus began sort of what I call the dark side of my vendor journey, where I ended up working for various vendors. Probably the one that is most prominent on my resume on LinkedIn there is NetApp. and ultimately SolidFire. And there's an interesting connection. It's like 12 years apart. But one of the products I helped bring to market was a compliance storage product. And you might remember this term we don't hear about so much in the industry called WORM, write once, read many disks, or write once, read many storage.
Oh, yeah, I remember, yeah.
So back in the day, this is how you would store important records and important archives and backups as a way to prove they hadn't been tampered with, because at the media level, once you wrote to them, as the name implies, once, you couldn't overwrite or rewrite, like the original CDs, not the rewritable ones, or the original DVDs, not the rewritable ones. And that became a really big product. It became $1 billion product that I was like a global specialist in, along with a buddy of mine. I got to tour the world introducing the product to various countries in Asia, even in Moscow, and certainly in Europe and everywhere. And I learned all about, compliance and how important it is to handle data responsibly. Be an adult in the room when it comes to actually managing data and storing it for regulatory reasons and legal reasons on this worm class storage. And so fast forward, after I left NetApp and SolidFire as CTO, I looked around and really enamored by the machine learning, artificial intelligence industry, got recruited into a startup that did that. And I like to joke, confirmation bias being what it is, I learned that machine learning is itself a very data-hungry technology.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I saw a ton of challenges, which were at the same time business opportunities. But if you're a data scientist, there's a ton of challenges in sourcing data, there's a ton of challenges in labeling it, getting your models trained, reproducing that once it goes in production and someone asks, why did your model do that? So lots of what I call data governance and management and operational challenges. And I realized, you know what? With my background and experience and passion for data, I'd rather actually work on a data startup than just, quote unquote, an AI or machine learning startup, as interesting as that really is. Mm-hmm. And thus became PencilDATA. I managed to recruit 2 great co-founders last summer. We all had our vacations and got a bit of a rest in before the sprint that began, the sprint that lasts as long as a marathon that began as a startup.
Right.
And around December of last year, put pen to paper legally and really hit the ground running in Q1 of this year.
That is so exciting. Thanks. That's a great story and a great background. And I touched in on privacy and information from an HR background perspective, HRIS systems, working in my young career with Ceridian, so I certainly can relate to that and certainly see that as an interesting point. And yeah, it is very true. Like you look at machine learning and AI, it certainly is very quite intriguing, but data is really king. And I think we're going to see identity play even more so of a role. And perhaps that's a future discussion we can have. But you gave me quite a term today that you wanted to discuss, and I'm going to bring this up, and then I'll turn it back over to you, right? But really, and I like this notion, and I like where you're going with this, and stop the presses, everyone. This is where the rubber hits the pavement, right? And it really is the importance of democratizing trust throughout digital transformation. And this is an important point. And, I can't wait to get your rich data perspective on it.
Yeah, sure. Again, back to headlines, right? We've seen what happens when you take data or digital trust around data for granted. You end up with Cambridge Analytica scandals. You end up with data breaches and us having to reapply for credit cards all the time.
Wow,
you end up with, the entire fate of the most powerful nation in the world being altered. So there's a lot of consequences to taking data for granted. And trust is something, I like to joke, it takes a long time to earn. It's very, very easy to lose. And kind of dating myself here, but in the Ronald Reagan-esque famous quote, trust but verify. It's an incredibly hard thing to verify, trust, and particularly in a modern digital context. Every company is transforming, how they do business with us digitally. If we didn't have a digital relationship before that, like me at a branch at a bank. And obviously most of the hottest companies, if you take a look at the richest people running the most valuable companies today, they're typically digitally native companies. So data and digital trust is something that, is worth a fortune. I don't think we can even put a figure on it, and is not to be taken for granted. But what I looked at, or what I realized, I should say, in looking at it, is it's expensive and it's slow to actually verify transactions and verify updates to databases and verify changes in files. And one of the many business opportunities I saw in dealing and addressing the data scientists in the machine learning market is that helping them. The Brits have a great term for this: data veracity.
Oh, fact, of course, love it. Yeah.
It's the fourth pillar of the four V's in big data. There's obviously volume, there's velocity and variety, and you've seen the industry mature quite a bit over the last decade or so in addressing those. Kind of the last untouched pillar is veracity. And Accenture, actually, of all people, does a great job. They've got a whole website devoted just to this. It's one of their top 2018 trends, where they've realized now, I'm talking to their customers like United Airlines, which saved over $1 billion by looking at all of its data and weeding out the old data and incorrect data. Yeah, planning routes. Turns out they were planning routes based on outdated information. So they were wasting more fuels and having emptier planes than necessary because their planning software was using old data. And you take a look at the mobile ad industry, and they saved something like $4 or $5 billion. That's a very, very big industry, by making sure they were targeting people who didn't lie about their age or didn't lie about their income or address or current job or whatever. So keeping sort of data not just up to date, but having data be accurate, having it be high quality and so forth, and having it be fresh. You don't want to work on stale data, just like you don't want to eat raw stale food or stale vegetables.
No, yeah, exactly. You don't want old data. You got to have fresh data. If you're ever going to get to deep learning, you better be dealing with that old data. Yeah.
Ask yourself next time you're using Waze or Google Maps to get somewhere and avoid traffic, whether you want yesterday's data or today's data right now, and you'll get a really good first-hand impression of the value of fresh data.
Yeah,
looking at all that, I realized it's hard. We were talking about my career. In the past, you'd have to be a large enterprise buying a large dedicated storage system to just store data at the media level, at the storage media level, in a way that couldn't be tampered with. That doesn't work for individual records inside a database very well, or individual files inside a big file system or object store. And it doesn't work for small companies. It doesn't work for individuals. It doesn't work for nonprofits or cash-strapped government departments. So there's a large opportunity to bring digital trust, the ability to verify, arbitrary data at a low cost in an affordable, scalable way, and very important to us at PencilDATA, in a very simple way, easy to use, low friction, quick time to value. Those are what we're all about.
Interesting. Well, I'll be curious to learn more. So what are some of the, bigger interest projects you've worked on in the short, you've been a relatively new startup. What's really hitting the where you see a big impact out there?
So we opened up our public beta. So we spent a lot of time in Q1 doing customer feedback. And fortunately for us, our customers kept saying, simplify your feature set. Don't expand it, which is a really good thing for a startup to hear, because we certainly can't be all things to all people. And it came down to help me verify arbitrary data that I encounter, verify the authenticity of it, if possible, the provenance and lineage of that data. And so as we started to listen to customers, we heard a lot of data scientists say, I've got, visual data sets for camera and facial recognition or object detection in a driverless car setting or so forth. We've just had a lot of customers say, look, I've migrated data to the cloud for the first time. How do I know that the cloud copy is intact? And then we started having, those second or third meetings with customers and meeting more people and realizing that there's both an incredible breadth and depth to this. So on the depth side, you've got a lot of admins now that are looking over their shoulders. Mm-hmm. Because whenever there's evidence of tampering, you see down here in the United States, Wells Fargo is perennially accused of tampering with customer information and selling them products they shouldn't be selling them. You've got the famous Dieselgate with Volkswagen out there in Europe and Germany. You've got, Symantec having to restate earnings recently because of accounting irregularities. You've got, examples of data or document tampering abound. And every time you take a look at those, you wonder, why didn't someone catch it, and who has the most ability? If you're an investigator, you're asking yourself, who has the most power or ability to tamper with content? And it's not usually an executive, believe it or not, and it's not usually like, it can be, I think the headlines show a lot of bad actors from outside the organization, outside the firewall.
Yep.
In reality, the most likely victim, or the most likely, I should say suspect, not victim in this case, the most likely suspect is the administrator. It's the sysadmin for the system or the network. It's the DBA for the database, because they have godlike powers over those systems. They can read anything. They can write anything. They can copy anything. They can overwrite anything. And so they're the first suspects in any investigation. And most of them, of course, are innocent. The vast majority are innocent. And so they need some kind of proof, some kind of credible, independent, objective proof that says, even if I wanted to, I couldn't tamper with this data. And so it turns out that, IT admins, which is a community I know very well, I used to be one of them, the community I go to throughout most of my career, they're sort of the first target community that has the most benefit from this, because now with very little effort, they can prove if content was tampered. There's an audit trail that we can look at that's irrefutable, but they can pretty much prove it wasn't me. It might have been my credentials that were stolen. It might have been bought off the dark web. But at the end of the day, look at my access patterns, look at these access patterns. There's no similarity there. And this document was registered as authentic before I even touched it, by PencilDATA. And when people verify the authenticity of the document, even if I wanted to overwrite it, the authenticity would flag true or false immediately.
Wow, so this is certainly interesting, because I certainly, from my background too, did enough in the document space, document management and enterprise content management. And really what I'm kind of hearing here and listening to is, I know from a cybersecurity perspective, from a forensics perspective, to get that digital review of what happened can be very difficult. And it sounds a bit like you're touching into areas that would certainly blow out some further, ability and control there as well.
Exactly. And, auditors, particularly forensic auditors, are some of our favorite target users and customers. But they'll be the first one to tell you, I don't have nearly as many digital breadcrumbs as I want to do my job properly.
Wow.
There's too many gaps in chain of custody for any database that's in production, any big file or object system that's in production, network diagrams or configurations. There's too many gaps in that chain of custody for me to know exactly when things went off the rails. And so if there was a more affordable way, a simpler way, a more scalable, or a way without performance overhead, for me to have a digital breadcrumb on almost everything, that would simplify the auditor's job. It would help the organization market themselves as more transparent and trustworthy to their customers and suppliers and so forth. It's a win-win for almost everyone, and it's the holy grail that we're bringing to the marketplace for this particular use case.
Wow, well, that certainly is exciting. Like in the last minute or two here, what are some final thoughts you'd like to share? And again, thanks so much for the time. This has been fantastic. If anything, it just opens up more conversation. But just in closing off here, some last thoughts. Thanks.
So let's talk about breadth for a little bit now. This is something that we're going to monetize later, because there's a lot more work involved. But think about driverless taxis for a moment. Mm-hmm. They're all over the headlines. And if you take a look at the practical application of that, there's at the very least insurance companies involved. And what they have asked us and our joint customers to do that are operating driverless or soon to operate driverless taxi fleets is, for liability purposes, every time a new passenger gets into a driverless taxi, I need to know the state of that vehicle, which, by the way, has 150 different software suppliers, all cooperating on that one vehicle. So there's a lot of software configuration state to track.
Wow.
There's a lot of sensor state. The unfortunate accident in Arizona was due to a sensor misconfiguration. There's a lot of, after incident, if an airbag sensor deploys, I need an instant fingerprinting of all the camera frames before and after. So it's not just data, it's software, it's configuration, it's state of hardware and sensors. There's so much going on now, and these markets are young, but they're going to be explosive growth, once they hit the mainstream in a couple of years. And, without digital trust, none of these markets could operate. They couldn't legally operate, they couldn't financially operate, and all of these things we look forward to in terms of very convenient transportation, personal transportation end-to-end, are fundamentally, the glue behind all that is digital trust.
Wow, it's so interesting. Certainly can carry conversations on to further. I'll be love to stay engaged with you as things evolve, and that's certainly an interesting point right there. It really is becoming the Internet of everything, and big data touching all those points, and how does public and identity rule into that, right? So certainly look forward to further discussions with you, and again, thanks so much. Take care.